come from Glenrock because the league rules are that a moderator must come from outside the voting district. So I came down the Garden State Parkway, and I came down at a fantastic rate of speed with my husband sitting next to me to make sure I didn't make a mistake. Boy, we made it at 19 miles an hour. It's been interesting. And I have my commercial, which I think I've lost. My commercial goes, this is a forum devoted to hearing the views only of the candidates running for school board. To ensure that the meeting is as informative as possible, we ask that everyone abide by the following. Audience questions and candidates' remarks must follow league policy of being concerned with the issues, not the personalities. But I can see here that's not going to be a problem. So that we can move along in the time allotted and hear equally from each candidate, we ask that you hold your applause until the end of the forum. Audience questioners should use cards provided to write their question and to whom it is directed. The question should address only those issues that come before this body to be voted upon. The moderator will avoid redundancy and select the questions to ensure a range of topics. And one other thing, we request that if you've got a telephone on, you turn it to vibrate instead of on. After candidate responds, and this is interesting, there will be no discussion from the floor. In other words, the candidates, and one thing I'd like to remind the candidates, because I've seen this happen before, if I ask a question, don't look at me, look at the audience. Okay. And we have a range of candidates. I assume that you know who they are. And I did not do this, so I'm not giving the names in alphabetical order. Elizabeth Baker, Donna Smith, Avery Julian, Anthony Mazzocchi, did I get it right? Okay. Robin Baker, Shannon Cuttle, and Sheila Sidnia, and she's planning to be here late. We had worked with the idea that there were 3 questions and that each candidate would choose 2 out of the 3. But given that we've got fewer candidates, we're going to give you all 3. So I guess I just read you the question, okay? And somebody will have to fill me in. Did you get these questions in advance, or, okay. All righty. So the first question is...
Excuse me, Madam Moderator, is there a timekeeper that we can look to? Okay,
would you be kind enough to show them what the cards look like? Yellow is 30 seconds, red is stop. You can finish your sentence, you keep going, and I stop you. Alrighty. Last year, several schools in our district faced difficult cultural situations, such as swastikas in bathrooms and a slave auction in a classroom. Assuming that even the best-run school districts have tough situations like these, what should the school board response to the community and the district be? And let's start with, I was going to say Ms. Smith, Donna Smith. And we are having problems because there are only 2 microphones. So.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. During my tenure on the board, I have made a point of being out in the public and in the community, talking to parents, to students, and to teachers about their concerns about the schools. Recently, one of the biggest concerns has been the issue of the swastikas and the slave auction and the concerns about the climate and culture in our schools. Students who have not really been given much of a voice in recent history have a lot to say about this, and only recently have they had a couple of chances to really talk to the board, and I think we need to have more of that because the students are on the ground, they know what's happening, and we need to listen to them. the racial incidents have really shaken our community. And it's not just the schools either, it's the wider community that is appalled by some of the things that have been going on. And so we have to engage the community also in conversations. I think everyone wants to do what's right. I think everyone understands the need for better dialogue where every person is treated with respect. And that is what I am hoping to accomplish if I get reelected to the board, is to have more of these courageous conversations that we need to have. But everybody must be treated with respect. We can't attack each other. We must listen and try to understand each other. And I think that professional development is going to have to be better in terms of cultural competency, better and more. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon Cuttle.
Just grab it.
If you can take it off, you're probably, if not, just take the whole thing.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. So, so this question is not a new question, right? So the incidents of the anti-bias incidents that happened last year are not new to our district or any district across the country, right? So bullying, harassment, intimidation, anti-bias incidents occur every day in our schools and our communities. What we need to do is acknowledge that they happen and be proactive and take steps to make sure that they do not happen again. Last year alone, after Trump was elected to office, there were swastikas and anti-bias incidents across the country. Southern Poverty Law Center reported more than 1,500 cases of bias and hate incidents, hate speech, language, and other reported in public schools across the country. We are not isolated. We are not a bubble. We are not exempt from dealing with hate and bias statements. One of the things we have to do as a district is to not just have better professional development and better communication between our schools, our parents and families, and the community, but we need to actually acknowledge and take action so we can prevent hate speech and bias in our schools and our community moving forward. It's not new. We have to take action. We have to take action now for our kids and our community across the climate and culture of our district.
Thank you. Elizabeth Baker.
Thank you, and I apologize for having to look up and down from over my readers because my glasses have been a casualty of the campaign. So we have to respond on many levels, and we did this last year, and I think we've learned from that experience. First of all, the board must, and the district must, recognize these incidents for what they are: incidents of bias, racism, and intolerance, harms not only to the students to whom comments may have been or actions may have been directed, but harms to the entire school community. We have to be clear in our communications with the classroom, with the school, with the broader district about what's going on. We cannot sugarcoat it, but at the same time as a district, we must make sure that we are communicating clearly but not escalating the situation in terms of the tension or bias within the school. And we must also make sure that we are labeling the behaviors, but not encouraging the students, not encouraging members in our community to label students or to aggravate already tense situations. We must also look at our policies, and we have been doing that. Coming out of last spring, the community and the board looked at our code of conduct and realized that bias offenses are not in and of themselves violations of the code of conduct, so we have to look at our policy. We must also listen to our children and involve our children in the discussion. Our children, particularly our children at the secondary school and the high school, have a great deal to tell us about the atmosphere in their schools, about the way they feel adults treat them, about the way they feel adults see or don't see what's going on around them. We have to involve the children in the solutions, and we must keep learning as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you. Avery Julian.
It's interesting that you mentioned involving the children in the solutions. It's one of the main reasons I'm running. my senior year at Columbia High School, I saw these issues of bias take place, actively spoke out against them, held a race assembly at Columbia High School in which we addressed teachers using the N-word. So there's much larger issues besides the ones that got notoriety in the last year. I think the way the board should have handled it and should handle it moving forward is to have one meeting only for public speaks, only to hear how the public feels, only for how the students felt about their situations, and to actively progress from that, listen to the children, and move on from what the children believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Baker.
The question was, what should the board response to the community and district be? And I'm kind of real meat and potatoes, straightforward. This is the tactical and direct way that a response should occur. I believe in a general sense, the board should firmly,
Yeah, thank you.
the board should reaffirm its position on bias and that it won't be tolerated in any form in our district and it's not welcome. That should be a public pronouncement, and it should be clear that it's associated with whatever the incident was that occurred. There should be facts provided to the public about what actually happened, so we don't have stuff going around that's half true, not true, partly true. And then in addition to the actual facts about what happened, there should be facts about what was done about it. You know, if it required an intervention of some sort, the public should be made aware of what was done about it. And then on an operational level, to those specific events, we need to make sure that when we put a sub in a class, because that slave auction event happened under a sub, we should make sure that that person is adequately equipped and has been vetted in a way that we know that they would know not to do that type of thing. There's more here, but
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mizaki.
Good evening, everybody. I've had the privilege of leading a summer school that I call a thick, tight-knit institution. And when painful things happen there, as they sometimes do, the effects on every single human being could be quite profound. I do employ restorative practices at this school, and the first step from leadership on down is to acknowledge, like I heard, and express our solidarity in the idea that an injury to one is certainly an injury to all, and we move forward in that regard. Your question had two interesting examples. To be clear, in my opinion, one example had to do with the actions of children, and the other example had to do with the actions of adults. So your second example, I must say, the way the question was asked, best-run school districts do not have slave auctions. You look a little closer and you're going to see this incident shine a light on many aspects of our schools that have really suffered at the most basic levels these past few years and prevent us from doing anything close to being a best-run system. This includes curriculum writing and updating, teacher mentoring and supervision, as Robin said, substitute teacher training and recruitment, opportunities to co-plan interdisciplinary lessons, and the list goes on the deeper you go. And this all leads to one of the more important questions this evening as to what we are going to do as a board member in identifying, hiring, and effectively evaluating a new superintendent who's going to have purview over all of these with all of us here. And I do hope that question gets answered this evening as well.
Thank you. We're moving on to the second question. Last year, the district was allowed to increase its tax levy beyond the state cap. The board eventually advocated a budget that raised taxes by 3.56%, but also saved some educational programs and teaching positions that had been in danger of being chopped. Given the choice between raising taxes beyond the cap and restoring educational programs and/or teaching positions, which would you choose and why? Shannon Cuttle.
Well, first of all, I think that this is a much more of a complicated question than 90 seconds can answer. but hopefully just kind of take a stab at it, because we do need to have these critical conversations about it. But one of the things that we need to look at also is what is working, what is not working in the district. And how do we prioritize critical programs that we do need for our students, programs that are also lacking that we need for our students, and at the same time have an understanding where the tax burden lies for those in our community that suffer with a higher rate of tax burden, and it's really hard for them to have that increase even at the smallest level. But at the same time, one of the ways that we need to approach this is, again, looking at what's working, not working, and looking at, again, our strategic plan and what our programs that we have are aligned within our strategic plan, and what programs do we want for the future, and how to work them into the strategic plan and create a funding formula for them to be successful.
Thank you. Anthony Mazzocchi.
75% of our budget is for staff and their fringe benefits, personnel. And then the next percentage that's left is for things like out-of-district placement, insurance, et cetera. And I've spoken loudly about needing to optimize that 25% of the budget through cutting the cord on addiction of our consultants, scheduling in a more innovative and cost-neutral manner to retain some of the programs I heard Shannon talk about, and a few other areas where I believe SOMSD is a financial outlier. But when it comes down to it, let's say you have 4 core academic teachers and you need to keep them by law, and we have to increase the tax rate by 2%, they must be kept. So then we get to the related arts, the creative subjects, and all these other things that I see as an essential to make up. So it's at that point the board must make tough decisions about whether to cut these or stay at a 2% cap. We also need to talk about buildings and grounds. You know, right now, if we take $10 million out for a building, that's $50 per household that we're going to have to talk about. And I'm sitting in this room that I grew up in, and it kind of needs it. So if we do not address this deferred maintenance, then the board has to raise class sizes. So these are difficult conversations. At the end of the day, I've said it, our budget is a reflection of our values. We must understand that we need to optimize everything we do first and absolutely stay as low as we possibly can. But sometimes staying at a 2% may prevent us from doing some of the things that align to our values.
Thank you. Robin Baker.
Make sure you speak into the mic, okay?
When we first moved here over 20 years ago, my husband and I had real concerns, because oftentimes when you choose a home, you're not always paying attention, your first home, to the taxes. So we heard that the district is spiraling out of control, and also I was very aware of the high taxes. So I decided to get involved way back then to find out what's happening, why are our taxes so high. And what I found was, one, there was a study done by a nonpartisan group that wasn't affiliated with the district at all, that found that in fact our district runs very lean and is pretty efficiently run, was pretty efficiently run when compared to the other districts in its district factor group. And as a matter of fact, even today, we spend less per pupil than all or most of the districts in our factor group. We decided to stay, understanding that we don't have a Short Hills Mall here. We don't have a Livingston Mall. We don't have a Route 10. We have a ratables issue, and that's not going to go away. We also know that the 2% cap, and this is widely known, is not ever enough to cover the increases in the main parts of the budget that we don't have control over, which is the teacher population, growth in student population. That is, at least in the last several several years, we have had growth that has exceeded the 2% cap. And I have to end there, so I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to switch. I just want to refer to my little grid here. so I'm not asking somebody twice. Avery, Julian, would you be kind enough? You can use the mic over here too, you know. There are two of them, actually.
I believe the question was which would I choose, the tax increase or restorative practices in school as far as teachers, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd be forced to choose the restorative practices because we have a district in which we can pay a puppet of a superintendent multiple salary increases for someone who hasn't even served their full contract. We also live in a district where we outsource our security situation for the high school. So I believe that we have the money, it's just where it's being spent. So increasing taxes, increasing the amount of money that we already pay, that's already high for this area, is really not going to solve the problem. What's going to solve the problem is redistributing the money that we already have. And I have a basic knowledge of the issue, but that's my stance as far as right now.
Thank you. Elizabeth Baker.
Thank you. I don't have to answer the question in the speculative because I led the board in the last budget and the decision to use 3.69% for the operating budget increase. And I did that because the 2% cap combined with the absolutely abysmal and unacceptable level of state funding is an unsustainable model for sustaining public education in our state. And our board and our community have, because of the incredible burden of taxes, have yet been reluctant for several years to recognize the impact that it's had on our schools. And that impact has been cuts, and more cuts that have been first in ancillary services, cuts that have been we've seen in deferred maintenance in our facilities while our enrollment's been growing and more demands are on our schools, and cuts that have reached the classroom. So I led the board, and I'm very proud of the process that we led this past year, where we were very transparent to the community as the impact of the cuts. We were very transparent to the community about the need to restore prior years of cuts and making very clear what the priorities were: health and safety and the classroom. And I'm proud to say that when we not only had the official budget workshop and information put out to the community via email, but additional budget workshops, and there was not a single comment submitted to the board in opposition to the budget or the tax levy. That doesn't mean we don't appreciate the burden, but it means that this community values our schools and that the health of our schools is recognized as being intrinsic to the health of our community. What I would like to do, and we'll talk about this later, is focus at the state level and attacking the unsustainable structure.
Thank you. Donna Smith.
As most board watchers will know, in the beginning years of my term on the board, I voted against using banked cap and stuck to the 2% cap for two reasons. One, because I am concerned about the burden on taxpayers, and two, because the district every year just came to us at the end of the budget process saying, okay, these are the cuts we're going to have to make, and we didn't feel like we were getting a clear picture of why and what options had been considered. This past year, however, the district really came through with very open discussions about the budget, explaining it to us clearly, and operating on a zero-based budget, which meant that they weren't just carrying over lines year by year. Instead, we're really examining what each department needed. And as Elizabeth Baker said, we focused on safety and on the classroom. And so this year I voted yes to use the bank cap. But unfortunately, that's not going to stay with us for very long. We're going to have to make other moves to get more funding. We need to explore other possible areas of funding and also go to the state and insist upon tax reform. There has been a little bit of movement this past year by legislators. They're finally talking about the issue and trying to make some concrete proposals. They haven't come through with much, but I'm hopeful that because this is becoming such a big issue, not only for our district, but for every district, that something might be done soon.
Thank you. We're now opening to questions from the floor, and I have one from a student. Pardon? Thank you. Good point. All righty. Last year, several schools in our district faced difficult cultural situations. Wait a minute, the district's elementary schools are operating at capacity, and in the near future, the board will need additional classrooms to meet the need. What is your plan to address overcrowding and segregation in the elementary schools? Mr. Mazzocchi.
The board hired a consultant to deal with this issue, and they came back with 4 recommendations. One was to renovate space. One was to build more space. The third was to perhaps redistrict. And the fourth, they wrote innovate. And I said in our last debate that that was not extremely helpful, even though I like that word. And I would like to address as many of those as possible at once. So I went back and I looked at the student numbers, and I came up with a interesting scenario where, you know, if the elementary schools were K through 4 and the 5th grade was not there, all of a sudden we have that space back. That those portables can, you know, not be used anymore, and all of a sudden, you know, there's that space. One middle school, let's say South Orange Middle School, becomes a 5-6 school. Child development-wise, educationally, that's very interesting. And now the students are moving as a cohort together instead of the first time in 9th grade from 5th grade on. That was stop.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So, and another school would be 7-8. And then we have the high school. Now, I developed as a supervisor here in district, I developed a performing arts magnet school that was going to be used for Montrose that we got very close to pursuing. And I do like a magnet school model for 1 or 2 schools that would solve that K through 4 integration issue, as well as some curricular issues here. I believe we have a real dearth of subject offerings here, especially K through 8 and certainly K through 4 and 5. So that is a sample of the way I think about these issues and the way I'd like to do those things all together at once.
Thank you. Okay, Donna Smith.
So the role of the board is to develop policies that serve to guide the administration in its operations. It is not to develop plans to operate the district. So I do not have a specific plan. However, there are several things the board can do in its policy governance role. It can provide guidance to the district, insisting upon something to be done that will desegregate the elementary schools. And usually this is done through a guiding change document that the board develops, and it provides the parameters in which the administration is asked to work on a particular issue. And so that would be one way we could do it. The administration is going to need to bring forth recommendations very quickly for our consideration. The demographer has told us that we need 26 extra elementary school classrooms. That's a tremendous number. Creative ideas like what Mr. Mazzocchi discussed might be something we look at. We have to decide, are we going to expand the elementary schools? Are we going to create several magnet schools? Are we going to build something somewhere or buy another building? Those are the various options that the administration has to consider, and to consider quickly, because we're getting very close to being in a situation where we can't continue. So that's the way I see the board working on it.
Thank you. Mr. Julian? Sorry. Favorite Julian.
In all honesty, I do not have a concrete plan at the moment. I'll work from my own experience, though. I grew up on past Boyden of Maplewood, so I grew up in Orchard. I was zoned for Jefferson. I think that if we keep maintaining diversity in our schools a priority, if we try to use the facilities that we have, i.e. the Montrose building, and we open up our classrooms, and we continue to put forth an effort to create that diverse learning experience, then segregation will fall to the side as long as we can maintain a constant work ethic for it. That's something that's been absent from the district in the past 10, 15, maybe 20 years. As far as the space, you'll have to give me more time with my team to develop a concrete plan on it, to be completely honest. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Baker?
So the work of the facilities consultant last year that the board used was not just to make recommendations about how we reimagine our elementary schools, but the board actually had to prove to the community and to the towns who will approve our bonding that in fact the classroom space was needed. And even here tonight, it still hasn't sunk in that we need at least 26 new classrooms and the attendant facilities to meet the growing demands of our elementary enrollment and to replace the 16 portable classrooms which have long past their useful life. Coming up with different organizational models for elementary schools and elementary population are key, but we have to build. And that was a very useful function. We did an inventory of every square foot of space in every school, every child, and the patterns of enrollment in our district. So in order to, we can't fit too many kids in too small a space. So we have to build. We have to look at organizational models that do not rely exclusively on the current zoned-based elementary model, because when you do that, you're not going to have consistent integration in your schools. Our integration or our lack of integration will be subject to economic and housing patterns as we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years. And we have to look at the best examples for maintaining and sustaining both very rich programming as well as rich and sustainable diversity in each school. We can build on a zone model, we can look at the magnet model, and we have to accept, and we also have to assess the costs and the benefits to students of each model, including the cost not only of transportation, but of distance from the school. But I believe integration is essential not only at the elementary level, but its benefits will be felt throughout the district as our students move forward.
Thank you. Robin Baker.
Okay, our dearth of space in our school is pretty clear and pretty concretely defined. We do know today that we're short 26 classrooms. That includes 16 portables that are, I think, over 15 years old or something like that, but they're pretty old. So this problem breaks kind of into two pieces, into a short-term problem and then into a longer-term problem. We need to do a full end-to-end assessment of the space in the district and determine what we need with a forward-looking view, given the building that's been going on in our area, in our two towns of apartment buildings and such, with a forward-looking view that anticipates where there's likely to be growth in our population in. The shorter-term view is that capital plans don't happen overnight. So we still have this issue of these classrooms that we are short. And so I don't think that 3 more years in that condition is going to work. So I believe that we're going to have to look at some potential alternative funding sources specifically for either updating or upgrading the portables, or look at the potential for leasing and trying to make sure that we upgrade those facilities in the most economical way possible. But the fact of the matter is that we're short, and that capital planning and capital building take more than just a heartbeat to accomplish.
Thank you. I don't know how you feel about it. If I leave the door open, you have noises.
That's
if I
Brahms
close the
Symphony
door,
number 3.
pardon?
That's Brahms Symphony number 3.
At this point, all I know is passing out can happen. I mean, how do you feel? You're up there. Leave it up? Okay, because it gives us a little bit of cross ventilation. Okay. We do have a question from a student. Do you have any idea? Pardon? Oh, I beg your pardon. Shannon, if you would.
I'll take that as not forgotten. That's even the best for last.
Do you want me to read the question again, or are you okay?
Sure.
Okay, someplace it was here, but the point was. The district elementary schools are operating at capacity, and in the near future, the board will need additional classrooms to meet the need. What is your plan to address overcrowding and segregation in the elementary schools?
Well, so first of all, that's kind of a together and two separate complete questions that we really do need to have a serious conversation about. We need to have a conversation about segregation in our schools, and we need to have it now. But as far as the capacity and the segregation issue, one thing that we have to recognize is that it's a health and wellness issue, first and foremost. If our students don't have spaces where they feel safe, affirming, and welcomed so they can thrive in the classroom, they can't be successful. If our students don't feel safe and affirmed and welcomed in the classroom because of who they are, it's not going to be the best case scenario. What we need to do when we look at this issue as far as the capacity for the schools, we do need to look beyond what our needs are, what is working, what is not working, take an inventory. At a recent Jefferson Town Hall meeting, Dr. Fakara had mentioned that he already has architecture firms looking into our building and structures. And I really look forward to see what's going to come forward. He estimated that he'll have that out potentially by December to see what we're doing. And we are facing a building crisis. Our portables are falling apart. They are unsafe. Students cannot be successful in unsafe facilities. Students cannot move forward to be their best selves, that we can support their best selves if they're in portables in classrooms and facilities where they do not feel comfortable, safe, and welcome. This is something that is a larger conversation, but it's an important one we have to talk more about.
Thank you. May I assume that this is Ms. Shednia? How do you pronounce your name? Shednia. Okie dokie. Well, we're up to the last question, and the last question was, the district's elementary schools are operating at capacity, and in the near future, the board will need additional classrooms to meet the need. What is your plan to address overcrowding and segregation in the elementary schools?
Hi, sorry. Lateness. Let me look at the question again.
The question is, what do you plan to do about the segregation and the overcrowding?
Well, the school district hired a consultant to look at this question last year, and after going through that material, which was online, a couple questions came to my mind, and one of them was that the outlook from the school board just seemed so dire upon hearing the results from the consultant, and I had a hard time believing that this was a new issue. So it seems to me that the school district has had this issue going on, for years and years and years, and now we are at this point that does seem like a fiscal cliff as far as having to deal with, can we build, new buildings? Can we repurpose some of the buildings that we currently have in order to manage the increase in population and the facilities? And really, I feel like that there needs to be a better outlook on where we generate additional income. If we have, from the state level, if we are not getting the funds that we need to find new ways of generating these funds instead of constantly every year going into this deficit and always starting at a loss and always starting at a patchwork. Oh, that was quick. So my plan is really generating new sources of funding from the community and outside the community.
Thank you. All right. I've done this 3 times, and I've always been told I've either missed a question or I missed a person. Okay, and now I've mislaid the question. Here we go. Evidently, this is a question from a student. She wants to know, do you have any ideas for lunch menus? Oh, Elizabeth Baker. I think this is a 1-minute question. I really don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it.
The question was lunch menus?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think it requires both input of parents as well as students. We have nutritional guidelines that are required by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Federal School Lunch Program, and we receive several $1 million each year in lunch money. So we have to comply with basic nutritional guidelines, but that's a minimum. The type of food we provide, how we provide it, the environment we provide it, whether we're promoting sustainable, healthy habits in a way that children feel they know that where their food is sourced, they are engaged in the process and they like it, which I think is what every parent wants, I think is key. And some of our schools have participated in the CATCH program, which does focus on sustainable and healthier eating. I'd like all of our schools to do that. When we have a great idea that's existing in some of our schools for so many years, I think it should be rolled out more broadly. But I also don't think that we've actually, as a community, asked students and parents what they'd like to see improved. And many of our schools have farmers markets that come on site and participate in forms of sustainable agriculture, and I really think that needs to be incorporated as well.
Thank you. Mr. Mizuki?
Of all the questions I've always studied for these, that one never, I would not have dreamed. But actually, I think it's a wonderful question. At my school in Vermont, we have a very interesting, we go farm to table with all our meals, mostly sugar-free. All the students know exactly where their meals are coming from, and I know this may not be able to happen in public schools, but they actually help and understand how that food is made. When I was a student in these middle schools, we had home ec, we learned to cook, and we had a really nice culinary arts program at the high school that I am extremely sad to see gone, especially in this day and age. What we do we've become consumers, and we learn that in the school system, and by understanding where these foods come from and other things, we stop being at least so much of a consumer mindset and think that eggs actually come from the supermarket. So actually, it's a very interesting question. If there's any way that I could be involved in something like that to bring health and diet to our students, I would love to do that.
Thank you. Robin Baker?
Well, I was once told that, and this was when Olivia was growing up, my daughter was growing up, that if you actually allow a child to choose what they eat and you put healthy stuff in front of them, they will actually over a week choose a healthy menu. And I thought, no way. So we tried it, and it actually happened. One day she would eat a whole bowl of broccoli, and we'd be like, okay, you need meat. And then the next day she would choose something else. And as we observed this, it actually happened. It would be interesting to see what, if we really did reach out to the community and to the students with an opportunity to have input, what would turn up as a list of menus that the kids really liked a lot, and whether or not it would actually cost us more to do what would be actually pleasing to them, and what obviously would be vetted and made clearly appropriate for school consumption, and what we do now.
Thank you. Shannon Cuttle?
Well, first, I want to say that is an awesome question. Is the question from a student? Does that student want to stand up? No? You don't have to if you don't want to. But I think that's really awesome. So it's awesome that you're here. It's awesome that you submitted a question and you're being part of the process and having your voice heard. So thank you for doing that. And to kind of add on to your question there, I think we should hear what students think. I know when I was a kid, that my biggest problem when I was a kid is that, I always wanted pizza Thursdays, and we never had pizza Thursdays. And so I think that we could do a good service of hearing and getting feedback on what kids want and what kids are looking for, but also at the same time, someone who is a school administrator, I've spent my own time actually trying to help in the school kitchens and cafeterias, and it's hard work back there. And a lot of the focus, we need to focus on whole foods, we need to focus on organic foods, less processed foods, but also foods that kids like and will eat and then can take home and show their families what new food groups that they've tried.
Thank you. Avery Julian?
I guess it's a very good question. Given the cleanliness of most school facilities, I advise that you pack lunch. But I know that's not a reality for everybody, so I think that speaks to a greater truth about how, the poor quality of, the actual cafeteria is probably maybe making the food a little worse. So if we focus on the cleanliness of things, that probably would improve the lunch for students. As far as the menu, I think we have to educate our students on what the right foods are to eat, how often you should be eating things, and provide an overall, wealth and health and wellness approach to our eating. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheila Sidney?
That was a great question. Thank you for that. I think that it would be one of the things that makes me excited about food is when I learn where it's from and how it's grown. And I would love to see community gardens at all of our schools that are actually used. And we could spend some of the time at recess, maybe cultivating these gardens and really finding out where our foods are coming from. And that makes it a little bit more exciting and interesting to eat. So for me, I think that would be a great addition to our school lunch program.
Thank you. Ms. Donna Smith?
Yes, a great question, and I think everybody pretty much has answered it. But I would like to point out that at Seth Boyden, they do grow food, and the kids are involved in planting and sowing and then eating, and they do get to see where food really comes from. It might be kind of nice to have a chicken coop somewhere too, and then they really would know where eggs came from. And I understand that South Orange is considering allowing chicken coops, and Maplewood already does. There's a limited number, but it's a good start. So I agree with everybody on this panel. I think that was a great question, and of course we all want what's healthier and better for our students. And I also agree that students should be able to have some choice as to what the food is. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll give this one a minute and a half. Do you see yourself primarily as a representative of the community or a representative of the school system? And let's start with Donna Smith.
That's another very good question. I think as a board member, we are equally representing the community and the school district. We are responsible for the school district, so we are a part of it, if only at the very top. Our only employee is the superintendent, and then the superintendent is responsible for its operations. But we also obviously come from the community. We are there for the community when we can be. The community comes to speak to us at meetings. We try to get out there and talk to the community at large as much as possible. And we, of course, represent the taxpayers of this district. But we also try to be champions of our school district, and we recognize that there are significant issues and things aren't always going correctly. There are fires being put out all the time. But we also are proud of the things that the district is accomplishing. We're excited about the strategic direction and the action plans that are being brought underway. And I'm especially excited about that because I think the policy of individualized learning, where students can choose their own pathways to how they learn the material, master material, and move on, is a really exciting new way of teaching and learning that can take us away from some of the divisions that we've dealt with in the past. So.
Thank you. Avery Julian.
I think there's an important nuance to that question, and I think of myself as a representative of the students. So I guess that would lean more towards the community, but I do agree with, Smith, in that you have to kind of, I think the most important thing about this job is being able to do both, being able to represent the district as well as the community. However, my priority will always be the students, what we do, or what, if I am elected to the board, what the board will do in the best interest of them, how to make them better, how to cater to their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon Cuttle.
So I think that's an interesting question. So, for me, I think that as a school board member and as a community member, it's equal parts of both. So as a community member, it's a school-home community connection. So a classroom can only be as successful as a school that supports it. A school can only be as successful as the community that supports it. And in my role as a board member, I would be representative of the community and of the schools and making sure putting students and families first. But at that same time, also making sure that I'm accessible and available to the community and making sure that there is transparency and also there's space for the community to come as stakeholders and other community leaders to join at the table, be a part of the table, have a place at the table when I'm a school board member, if elected, to make sure all of the concerns are heard across the school community.
Thank you. Sheila Sidnia.
To echo what Avery said, I think that the #1 priority of the school board is to provide the students the best education possible for the tax dollars that we have. And in that capacity, I see it as working 100% for the community. It is the representation of the community to the administration. So the roles that the school board has in hiring the superintendent and presenting policy ideas to the administration, I see it on behalf of the community, that they act as a unified representative.
Thank you. Elizabeth Baker.
So I agree that the role of a school board member involves intrinsically being the voice of the community, a representative of the community, as well as owning the responsibilities and the moral and legal obligations of being a member of the school board and always being focused on the interests of the students. That is, under the school board code of ethics, that is the #1 responsibility of a school board member, to ensure that every action we're taking not only benefits the district, but the district is serving the needs of students. That has to be the true north of everything we do. School board membership, or the school board model, is actually somewhat unique to the United States, and I've friends in other countries who've been involved in movements for democracy who are actually fascinated by it, and it's really the cornerstone of public education. And so a school board member has to both be eyes and ears for the administration from the community, has to be accountable to the community, has to be a vehicle for bringing the community, and particularly this community, not only the values of the community into our educational system, but the talents and resources. And that's something I do think we've made some progress on in the last few years, creating structures and forums where the community, we can actually recognize the expertise in our community as well as the voices and concerns. So I think it's a dual role, but I do think the school board, everyone who's serving on the school board has to own the responsibility of making the difficult decisions that are in the interest of students. That's our role.
Thank you. Anthony Mazzocchi.
I'll echo a lot of what I just heard. I think everybody has a better idea. But what's interesting is, at one point we had 10 people running for the Board of Education. and we've had teachers at board meetings, and we've had a lot of some confusion, some anger, a lot of stuff going on, and that's evidence of a disconnect somewhere. There's something off, and we all have different ideas of why that is. And when I have been in some people's homes to talk about it, they've had reasons too. When I was a supervisor here, I was really struck with how there was this wall between the district and the community in so many ways. And I do want to commend Ms. Baker and Ms. Smith for seeking through the strategic planning process to kind of break that down. Maybe they didn't think about that as a wall, but I certainly did. But right now, I have found myself talking to the community about what a board does, and why a lot of the questions they ask me should be on the superintendent search committee questions and not necessarily questions for the board. And we need to continue to communicate effectively in order to educate and, yes, be transparent in that process as to what we do, what we're trying to do, what we should do. And I think that we need to grow in that regard too. Ms. Baker said something about focusing at the state level with state aid. I was a proponent of focusing on the state level when it came time to standardized testing and the hyper-standardization that's going on in our district. So we can reimagine within the law what a board does as well.
Thank you. Robin Baker?
As I listened to the question read, I thought to myself, why do I vote? How do I choose who I'm voting for school board, and what do I think of when I choose someone? It's the community that elects the board, and not everyone in the community is actually associated with the school. Some send their children to private schools or directly associated. I think that all of us are, because the health of a community is inextricably tied to the health of the school district. So I think it is both, and I believe that at least the people that I have spoken to, the reason that they support me, the ones who have children in district, who have children out of district, who are on fixed incomes and don't have children in school at all, have talked to me about their expectations that I will do what's best for students in the district, make sure that our schools stay healthy, and understand also the impact that decisions that are made at the district level, that we understand how they affect every single one of those people, not just someone with a person in school, but also someone with someone in a private school or someplace else. So I think it's a balance that we strike, and you can never go wrong by doing what's right for your schools.
Thank you. Ms. Misaki, before you faint, why don't you take the sweater off? I can't tell you, I'm with this cross ventilation, I cannot imagine the heat up here. I'm not exaggerating. I'm sure you're feeling it down there, but there's no cross ventilation up here. It's really pretty nasty.
Want me to go behind the curtain?
Well, it's up to you. No, but seriously, if you would, please take this.
It's coming off.
It's just looking at you, I think.
Okay, in the meantime, there's a question addressed specifically to Avery Julian. We'll give him between a minute and a half. What do you think of police mentoring in our schools?
That was a minute and a half to think about it or to respond? Police
You're supposed to answer.
mentoring in our schools.
I guess I need to understand, are there police in the schools or no?
They're not to my knowledge.
Okay.
We have security guards that mimic a police presence, in my opinion. I feel like police mentoring, I think the police shouldn't be concerned about mentoring the schools. They should be concerned about the safety of the actual streets, the safety of the school. I feel like if you, in an attempt to build some type of community connection, maybe once a month you have officers come in and do like some type of communicative program to help strengthen, weak bonds. But the police and the school specifically police and black students, as we saw in this past year, there's a big mistrust in the entire department of the police in our community. So I think before anything happens with the police coming to the school, they have to do a lot of reform with themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is an important enough a question. Does anybody else wish to address it? Okay, Robin Baker.
Okay. And I'll make sure I put my caveat in place. I'm assuming that that's question was regarding SROs, and we used to have SROs. I think they were school resource officers in the schools. But thank you. There is a huge rift right now, and it happened because of an incident in July of 2016 that created a big source of mistrust between students of color and the police department. And it's not the fault of all police officers, but that is something that has to be wholly resolved before SROs would be introduced into the schools again, and before they could have any positive effect if they were to be introduced again. Students have to feel that the SROs, if they are in the school and there is an opportunity to bridge a gap that is developed, not to bridge, but to maintain after that gap has been bridged, some semblance of a positive relationship. Every student in the school has to feel like an SRO is there for them. Not some feeling like, oh, well, that person's protecting me, and the others feeling like, well, I'm protecting everybody else from you. If there's that kind of feeling, and that is what has developed, then we have to fix that before there could be any SROs reintroduced into the school.
Okay. Ms. Smith, if you would.
I'll make mine brief. Initially, when we were considering the possibility of bringing SROs into the school, I thought it might be a good idea, not for discipline, but for what Mr. Julian was saying, for students to get to know police officers in a different way, and that the familiarity might be a good idea. But after listening to the students speak out against the possibility, I changed my mind, and I agree that at this point in time, it's not the right time to bring in SROs to the school. But I do like Mr. Julian's idea of eventually maybe having someone come in once a month and start the dialogue. But first, the police have to work on their own training and improve the situation before we get to that stage.
Thank you. Mr. Mazzocchi?
I want to recognize what's been said, but I don't believe, and I don't know how to get clarification on this, that we're not just talking about SROs. I believe we're also perhaps talking about nonprofit programs after school as well. And if we are, I want to recognize that there's actually a lot of pain out there about this, and it's very understandable to me. It kind of goes to what Robin was saying, that there is a lot of healing that needs to go on before this continues, in my opinion, these programs. About July 15th, there are there are officers on the force that have yet to be identified. I don't know if they are part of these programs, and I think it's not so much to ask that we at least start there and move on. And I've heard both sides of the conversation, and it is obviously complex, but I think we need to recognize that right now there is some severe disappointment, agitation, fear, and healing that absolutely needs to be done, not only with the SROs, but with this particular program as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Fine. Shannon Cuttle?
So in the question of regards to police within our schools, so we do have programs right now that do have not just police officers, but school safety officers that are part of programming in our district in various ways. whether it's meet a police officer or assisting with the DARE program or in other capacities. But students are aware and do see uniformed officers at times, not just throughout the school day, but throughout the school year for various reasons. And I think that one of the things that we have to look at moving forward is also identifying and looking at how we are integrating school security, school safety officers, police officers into our district and into our classrooms, and the overall climate and culture, what that represents, not just within our community, but within our schools. And we have to look at the fact of how the stigma and attached disenfranchisement of marginalized students are attached to police officers, school safety officers, and how that brings a lot of trauma to students, not just from what they see on TV or hear on TV, but from what they experience in their everyday and real lives through their friends and their families and their everyday experiences. And we have to talk about that. We have to break that down. And we also have to acknowledge the fact that students, especially marginalized students, we're talking about Black and brown students, LGBT students of color, face higher amounts of school-to-prison pipeline and incidents that are related specifically to school safety officers being in classrooms and facilities who are not trained and appropriately trained in best practices.
Thank you. Elizabeth Baker.
Thank you. I share Shannon's concern and opposition regarding school resource officers in our school, and had expressed my opposition to our then superintendent, Dr. Ramos, when the proposal was made to the community, because I had firsthand seen police officers interacting in an inappropriate way with students and members of our community on school grounds. So I think that was a foreshadowing. I don't think July 5th, 2016 happened in a vacuum. It happened because there was a disconnect and a lack of accountability between our police department at every level and our young people and our community. Clearly no one from the chief of police to many of the other officers on down had a relationship with any of the children at the 4th of July event, because if they did, they wouldn't have thought that they lived in another town and marched them to the border of Irvington. So in terms of mentoring, I do think that in order to mentor, you have to be comfortable as a leader. And what we saw in the Hillard-Hines report is that there was a lack of leadership development within the police department. The police officers who knew that night that what they were doing was wrong and harmful to students and harmful to the community didn't feel empowered or didn't feel that they had the skills to express their concern privately, that it wouldn't be insubordination to tell their superiors that this was wrong, that the young people lived here, and that this was not serving any constructive purpose and was in fact discriminatory. So before we mentor, I think we have to develop the police as leaders, and I believe the police department and our township need to convince the community and the school district that that significant work has happened.
Thank you. Sheila Sidney, do you wish to talk?
I mean, I echo a lot of the statements that were made today, but for me, we can work with the town and the police, the department, to make sure that there's anti-bias training, but there needs to be a process in place with the school board and the school board's conversation with the administration, so that when things like this happen, it's not just putting a Band-Aid on another broken situation. It needs to be well thought out. Teachers need to be trained. They need to be trained before the school year starts, along with instituting standardized testing on Common Core curriculum. When Common Core curriculum wasn't taught in all the schools consecutively for year after year, in order to be able to teach, in order to be able to test these kids, it's the same thing. There's no process in place to ensure that this type of decision is made that will hurt the kids, in the schools. So I think that, across the board, there just needs to be long-term thinking before even considering putting an SRO in the school on training and discussions with the community.
Thank you. Okay, we've got another one. I don't think we have time for all of the questions, but I think we can manage 2 more, maybe 3. This one says, tell us how you plan on fixing the digital divide in this district, especially how it relates to libraries. Donna Smith.
So it's interesting, I was just listening to a panel the other day about the digital divide, and we clearly do have an issue here in this district in that some children are from families that don't have access to computers or the internet, and yet they're expected to use the internet for their schoolwork. So one of the things that I support wholeheartedly is having extended hours at the library, at the high school especially, so that students can stay after school and utilize the computers that are there and get on the internet and do the research that they need to do. We need to provide better support altogether on that issue because we've had fairly low staffing in the libraries, and it is an issue that we have to deal with. Especially because our students are going to be entering a world where it's critical to have the knowledge. I would like to see more teaching of coding for our students. We barely get any of that in the curriculum, and that's something that's essential for success for so many areas in the real world. And so I'm hopeful that we will be able to start implementing more of that. I know we adopted an AP computer class, but there's a lot more that can be done.
Thank you. Robin Baker.
Okay. It's my understanding that today in our district, there are about 15% of our students do not have access to internet service at home, and so have to be really creative. And I don't know today what they do to get their homework done when an increasing amount of homework requires the use of the internet. So I am aware that both our towns have on the table and are working towards some fairly significant improvements to the public libraries. I don't know enough right now about what the plan is for those libraries, whether that will include around the clock, or it won't include around the clock almost certainly, but whether it'll include extended hours so that students who have that, who do not have personal access to the internet can use those facilities. It might be a great idea for the district to reach out to those libraries and make sure that, at least in the interim, until we can find a solution that actually enables us to provide in their households access, or to find the money to help do that, either from private groups or internally to the district. It's my hope that at least the libraries will coordinate with the schools to choose hours that make it easier for students to have access.
Sheila Sidnia. And thank you, by the way.
I think in addition to making sure that students have internet access at the libraries, I think there needs to be a discussion among the administration of the middle schools and the high school as to what is required during school hours. So I know I have a child who went through middle school and high school and is required to take out her phone and look up assignments while she is in school, and at times she doesn't have a phone, and I know that not everyone has these unlimited data plans and this ability to be able to access the internet 24/7 during or just during the school day. So I think that in addition to being able to provide adequate access either in the libraries or at the school, there needs to be some type of mandate as to what we are going to ask these students to do online in the evening or during the day, because just that stigma alone can restrict a student's ability to have the best education possible. So I think it's a larger issue than just making sure there's internet in the libraries.
Thank you. Let's see now. Anthony Mazzocchi.
So those who know me know that I'm extremely passionate about this and related subjects, which is that the digital divide is part of an opportunity gap that we have. An opportunity for students to be exposed to and have access to and equity to something so rich as technology. And essential, I mean, you know, artificial intelligence is the next tsunami in this world. And if you don't believe that, just look at the internet 10 years ago. And we're talking about access to technology. We're talking about access to creative subjects. We're talking about access to a well-rounded education. And we've lost that here. We've lost it greatly. Over the past 8 years, we have become a narrowed, one-size-fits-all model that is absolutely starved for any kind of subjects that close this opportunity gap for all of our students. And it deeply affects the achievement gap, which we've been chasing by standardizing our curricula and gutting it down to meet the state's almighty standardized testing regime that is going away soon. So these things I want to talk about in a holistic sense, because we need to talk about education in a holistic sense. And I want to take a very close look at what we've been doing now. I know we might be talking about $50,000 here or there for consultants, etc. That could be going to these things instead.
Thank you. Avery Julian.
You could say, got in trouble a couple of times my senior year of high school for advocating for students of color being unreasonably thrown out of their library. So the lack of internet, I don't think exists, but I think there's an extreme lack of access to school resources as far as it concerns students of color. I remember getting into a passionate argument with a teacher and explaining that this student did nothing wrong. He was only talking to his friends, and you decided to kick him out of the library. So I think that is the biggest problem when it comes to our school resources. And that it was explained to me by the principal that the reason why the libraries are closed and that there's these different, you know, almost loophole things you have to go through in order to get a pass to go to the library is because there is a lack of teachers now because of the cut of teachers. And I feel like we have to look at these issues as very interconnected. For example, the reason why we cut teachers affected how students can access one of their main and vital resources, which then only results in who's suffering? The student. So if we open up ourselves to making it a priority that, you know, everybody can come to our library, if we make it a priority that, you know, we make sure we have people employed in our district that are not seeing our students as black and white, or not seeing our students not in black and white, but not letting that affect how they teach them. Would probably be a better way to put that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Baker.
The digital divide is real, and it is not only an opportunity gap, but I really think it alters not only student achievement while a student is in our school district, but it really directly impacts their opportunities that they have once they leave Columbia High School. So I think we have to deal with this a couple of ways. First of it, in the very short term, our libraries are overhead right now. They're overhead that we're paying for. They're open, they're space. We've got the actual computers, we've got the Wi-Fi, and expanding access to the libraries after school is the first place to start. It's something that we already are doing this year for Columbia High School by funding an additional librarian position with the extra money that we received from the state this summer for that very reason, and to respond to the situation that Avery called out where the cuts to the high school last year restricted access to the library. I think we also need to look at one-to-one computing, and we have to make sure that every child in our district has access to the computer and the internet, not just at the library, but in their home. If we're really talking about equity, if we're talking about equality, we have to make sure that every student has the same access to technology, not just to get their homework done, but to explore, to be creative, to build the skills, because the problem-solving skills, the exploration skills, and everything else that comes with having access to technology is going to serve them not just in their school day and in their school career here, but in their life going forward. It's a basic career technical education requirement.
Thank you. Shannon Cuttle?
So I agree with what many people have said here. The digital divide is an access and equity issue, and it is a gap issue. There are a lot of families, there are a lot of students that do not have equal access and opportunities to use various forms of technology that other students have access to. This is also a STEM issue, and this is an issue that we need to talk about, not just, again, for access in the libraries, for students to look up resources for homework and for papers, but this is about teaching them how to use technology in every aspect of their lives. We need to talk about digital citizenship. Digital citizenship implies a teaching technology life skills so students are better prepared for the future, not just in academics, but in their everyday lives, because moving forward, technology is being more and more integrated, computers and technology are being more integrated throughout our communities, throughout our lives, and we need to develop better ways and pathways for students to have access. As somebody who has worked in Detroit schools before, I had students who had zero access to Wi-Fi at home, zero access, and I'm talking about we had to share maybe one classroom computer that was for maybe 60 students at a time. But there are MOUs, there are grants available from Microsoft, from IBM. There's other opportunities that we can look at to make sure that we are ending the digital divide and providing access and opportunities for STEM and technology for all students.
Thank you. All right, this is the last question, and essentially I'm combining two of them, and then there will be a question with the need for 30 seconds each of you to answer, and then I get to remind you about going to the polls. Okay. The questioners want you, all of you, to explain why you're the most qualified to identify, oh, excuse me, it is different. I think what I want to do is, what are 3 skill sets that you have that will make a positive impact on the board and the, district? I'm having trouble reading handwriting. Okay, let's start with Mr. Mizaki.
You started asking a question regarding the superintendent search. No, this is different.
No,
You conflated
I'm
two.
skipping that.
Okay.
We're going to skill sets, because nobody's had a chance to have an opening or closing statement. So, okay, what 3 skill sets do any of you have that make you the person who should be on the school board?
Besides the fact that I seem to sweat a lot,
As do we all.
I've dedicated my life to educating children. I think about children first all day long. It's what I dedicated my life to about 20 years ago. I never thought I was going to do it, but I have. And that is something that is really deep in my core. And because of that, I have played, so that's one, I've played many roles in education that has led to a unique life and certainly a unique perspective that I believe I could bring to a 9-member board. I've been a teacher, I've been an assistant principal, I've been a curriculum writer, I've been an administrator in this very district, I'm a parent, I'm a dean at a college that trains teachers to go out to the school system, which, by the way, we have a real divide between K through 12 and higher ed that I'd like to help us communicate with. I think that that's going to be really helpful. And so I probably named more than 3 in that, but that's what I believe I will bring to the board, of just a diversity of thought.
Thank you. Sheila Sidnia.
Well, I have spent a lot of time in as a project manager and marketing director, working with nonprofits and with artists and in education. And one of the reasons I decided to run for the board because I felt there was a lack of process and long-term thinking when it came to some of the policies that were implemented. And so I thought that maybe that this is a place where I could be of service. Secondly, I've spent the last 4 years acquiring a master's in music therapy. And what that training has taught me is about the value of neurodiversity and of equity and the lack of equity in our school systems. So that training and that education I can bring to the board as we start to discuss policies that affect all our students. And thirdly, it's passion. I don't have a manager managing my campaign. I am not doing this for any reason other than I feel the need to be of service in my community. And I found that there was some lack in transparency and communication, and that I could offer my time to help bridge some of the gaps that we have.
Thank you. Shannon Cuddle.
So, one of the many reasons why I'm running right now for the school board is not just because I have 20 years of experience in education, as somebody who is a teacher, school administrator, somebody who is a policymaker on the federal level, on the state level here in New Jersey, and the local level, supporting parents, families, and students with best practices and resource, a lot of time behind the scenes, but also as somebody who's dedicated and passionate for the future of our students, and knowing that the current climate and culture that we're in nationally is going to trickle down to where we are locally. And we need to take action to move forward. And I'm uniquely qualified to be able to do that because of the various background experiences that I've had as a leader, as a policymaker, and someone who's spent, again, a lifetime passionately devoted to students and families, not just in our district, but across the country. We have to move forward together, and we have to put students first.
Thank you. Robin Baker.
So, I'll start with
Into the
my
mic. Make sure you do.
Yes. I'll start with my, thank you. My technical skill and background is in finance and strategic planning with a healthy dose of process improvement. We're in a district now that has the need to be very clear about how we're spending money, where we're spending it, and why. And that skill set, that particular technical skill set, gives me a bird's eye view and an understanding of how to look at a big picture situation and break it down to know what questions to ask to get at the real crux of the matter and issues versus getting caught in the weeds. Additionally, my temperament. I am the type of person who listens to everyone, who is open and inviting and always extending a hand to everyone to talk to about what their situation is and what their feelings are about how things are going, or what they would like to contribute, or what they feel is wrong. And I work with people constructively to come together and create consensus. The example is, I've done this before. I was on the board that came up with the Seth Boyden School. That was a very contentious time in our district as well. And we got together and figured out a way to address the desegregate a very segregated school in a way that was healthy and positive for the district. And I believe that I can bring that same acumen to the board again.
Thank you. Avery Julian.
I just started Rutgers Newark. My first class, I found out my English professor, he's from Maplewood. I told him I'm running for the Board of Ed. He was instantly interested in that. And he described it to me about a week ago. He encouraged me to stop, that if I get elected, it's a bad idea, I shouldn't do it, it's a thankless job. And I just sit there and explain to him that this has probably been one of the few things that's given me some sense of purpose in the past 4 years. And I may seem frustrated up here because I'm tired of listening to people dig up and around these answers, tired of them dodging questions. And it seems like everyone wants to get caught up in this little banter we have here, or Maplewood, we're South Orange. What about the children? I led the Trump walkout. I had bi-weekly meetings with the principal and other administrators of Columbia High School to affect change. My voice is something that the students can identify with beyond some, fantastical seat on the board. They see me as someone they sat in class with, someone they saw in the hallway still fighting for them. And if you all cannot get behind that, then I don't think you are behind the students whatsoever in this district. If you want to continue to vote for the same thing, you'll get the same results. It is just that simple. Also, this forum is really not the best platform for me to express my views, as it is not for my own running mate. You can find us at George and Julian, 4, BOE.com, as well on Facebook, George and Julian, 4, BOE. We also will be having a meet and greet at Top Hats and Tails, October 21st, which is next Saturday, 11 to 1 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Baker.
Thank you. For my entire adult life, I've been an advocate for social and economic justice. I'm a worker side labor lawyer by training and profession, and I've also, before law school, worked for 5 years doing housing and public benefits advocacy for low-income New Yorkers. So I believe strongly in the role of advocacy, and I brought that voice as of an advocate to the work of our school district. But what I'm really proud of, both in my professional career and what I brought to the board, is that I've not only advocated, but I've worked very hard to make change happen. And change doesn't happen overnight. And on the board, it begins at the policy level, it begins at the budgetary level. It begins by actually finding ways to work with other people who may not agree with you at all, or have a common definition of the problem, not only to build a relationship, but to actually come up with a plan of action that's going to get it done. As board president for the past almost 2 years, I have worked very hard to build the capacity of the board, to build the cohesion of the board. Some may remember the board in my first year as a new member. When I was not president, the meetings were unproductive, they were acrimonious, and many community members came out saying, "Why is the board so divided? What are you getting done?" As a new leader with only 1 year on the board under my belt when I was asked to be president, my goal was to actually build the team, to find ways for people who did not agree to actually own the problems of access and equity, own the financial problems, and actually focus together on the work of our students and making our district better. And I believe that culminated recently in the interim superintendent selection. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to finish with Donna Smith.
So I've been scribbling different skills of mine that I think are important, and there's so many different things that go into that, but I'll start with number one, my perspective as a parent of 3 boys who went through all of the schools in the school district. They all graduated from Columbia High School, so I've been in every nook and cranny of the school district for a number of years. I'm also a lawyer, so I feel that one of my strengths is helping with policy. It's something that I do in my work for clients, and so it's something that I enjoy doing for the board. I'm also an adjunct professor, so although I'm not a real expert in education, I do have some perspective of teaching and learning from the years that I've been doing that. I also had been, for a long time before I got on the board, an advocate for access for all students to more rigorous curriculum and teaching and learning. And I'm very excited about the fact that the board finally was able to pass the access and equity policy after all those years. And I know that the implementation has been rough, but I think that it will improve, and that's one of the things I would be delighted to be able to work on for the next 3 years. Being on the board requires a lot of work, and my other skill is that I am a very hard worker. And when I was running the first time, I was asked at one of these debates, how many hours do you think you'll spend as a board member? And I said 20 hours, and it's been at least that, but it's been the hardest work I've ever done, but it's also been the most rewarding. Thanks.
Thank you. The league had one more question, and we're just going to go right straight across. Everybody has 30 seconds, and the question is, what do you think is the best thing about the district? And we're going to start with Ms. Baker. The first Ms. Baker, then the second Ms. Baker, then Ms. Cuttle, or Shannon, excuse me. And we're just going this way. Okay, 30 seconds each. What's the best thing?
I think we have an incredible wealth of resources, and I also believe that at this moment we have a community consensus to actually do what's right by our students and to stop the pendulum from swinging back and forth from equity to something that has been the status quo. And I think this is a moment where we have the leadership within our teachers. We have a community consensus that this is the work that we must do, and we have many members of our community coming forward, volunteering both their talents, their money, their expertise to actually do it.
Thank you. Robin Baker.
I think the best thing about this district is the people who make it up. The folks who come out and care and put their voices forward, and the fact that you can actually be heard, and that we have come to a point where you can discuss and begin to actually make progress on some of the things that have bedeviled this district for a long time. We are not even close to perfect, but I feel that we have a sense, a great sense of purpose among all the people up here, and that everyone's heart is in the right place, even if we don't necessarily agree with each other on everything.
Thank you. Shannon Cutler.
Cuddle.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm experiencing a little bit of heat too.
Right. So, well, one of the best things I think about our district is the fact that we have a lot of engagement here from the community, and we have a lot of thought leaders and advocates, and we have a lot of folks that wanted to be invested in and get involved in our community. And that is actually also one of the ways that we can actually try to improve our district and make it better. We all have a part to play. We all have a responsibility to make sure that all of our students feel successful, have the tools that they need to learn and grow and thrive inside and outside of our classrooms, our schools, and our community. It's up to all of us collectively together to ensure that our students succeed. Only then will our community succeed.
Thank you. Avery Julia.
It's pretty obvious. I think the best thing about this district is the students. You know, everything that we could possibly pat ourselves on the back for is because of them. Their tenacity, their ability to succeed, even when we have a district and policy set up against them. You see it at the basketball games, you see it during the play, you see it everywhere. It's the students. It's that simple. I'm surprised no one said it yet, but then again, not really. But honestly, it's the young people here in this community.
Thank you. Mr. Anthony Mazzocchi.
Yes, I'm saying the same thing in a different way. It is the people. You know, it's incredible when I look at all of my neighbors, obviously out here, up here, the lawyers, the doctors, the musicians, the actors, the dancers, the business class, the creative class. We live in this incredibly rich and diverse ecosystem in our two towns. I grew up here, I went to school here, I proudly live here because of that, and most of us will say that. I want our schools to reflect that and they don't right now, and I hope that I get to meet you and talk about that a little more, and that's what drives me to run for Board of Ed again.
Thank you. Sheila Zinnia?
To echo what everybody else has said, it is the community, but it's not just the community, it's the passion that this community has for making these two towns exactly what they want to see. It's not enough to just talk about diversity and talk about these towns, you know, having access to the city, but really doing the hard work to make this a place for everyone. The passion is there. You know, when I started to run and people would ask me, you know, why are you running? My first question was, why aren't you? And almost immediately, I hear, I'm going to do it next year. Well, I'm going to do it here. And I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and this is how I'm going to make a difference. And that's what really makes this community so special.
Thank you. Donna Smith?
So, Mr. Julian, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say our best asset is our students, witnessed by a student coming to a debate and submitting a question, students that come to the board meetings and tell us what they think or showing the good things that they've been doing, a really recent graduate running for the Board of Ed. That's our students, and that's what I am most proud of about our district.
Thank you. I have been told that the program will be aired on Soma TV. The Lieutenant Governor debate will air on October 16th, and another gubernatorial debate on October 18th. Voter registration deadline, if you're not registered to vote, move yourself. You have to have your application in by October 17th. The deadline for the application for vote by mail is October 31st, and election day is November 7th. I would like to thank the audience and certainly the perspiring and passionate contestants or candidates. Thank you very much for running, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Mr.